tied to a cactus and left for the sun to finish her. A cowboy cut her free at noon and gave her cool shade. The rope was good rope. That's what I remember first. Not her, not the blood on her wrists, not even the fact that she was still alive when I got there. The rope. Because a man who uses good rope on a woman he's abandoning to the desert, that's a specific kind of evil. The kind that plans. The kind that's done this before and may do it again and spent money on the doing of it. Not bailing twine. Not something pulled off a fence post in a hurry. Good braided three-strand, the kind you'd use on cattle. Something from a hardware store, something bought. I've thought about that rope a lot over the years. I think about it still sometimes, the deliberateness of it. I was cutting across the flats below the Pedernal Ridge late June. The kind of late June where the light has weight, where you can feel noon coming at you from 2 hours off, the air pressing in from all directions at once, like the sky is squeezing the land. Flat and pale and enormous, the kind of country where you can see a man at 5 miles if you're paying attention, and I'm always paying attention, or at least I was that day. My horse, Grullo, had got something in his left front shoe the day before, a sharp piece of shale, worked in sideways, and I'd spent 20 minutes with my knife getting it out that morning, cleaning around the frog to make sure nothing had set in. He was still favoring it some, and I was walking him down the dry wash to spare him. I wasn't in any particular hurry. I wasn't going anywhere that required hurrying. I'd left the McCready outfit outside of Sonora 6 weeks before. Quit clean, no argument, no confrontation. Just handed my string back to the wrangler, 3 good horses I'd worked 2 seasons with, and it cost me something to hand them back, but they weren't mine, which is the nature of hired horses, drew my pay, and started riding north by northwest without a specific plan. I was 54 years old. I had a bedroll, a saddle, a rifle in good condition, about $40 and a little silver in my boot, and no particular reason to be anywhere. The lack of reasons had become its own kind of weight, that kind of quiet that fills up the space where a life used to be. But I'm getting ahead of things. I wasn't thinking about any of that on the flats below Pedernal. I was thinking about Grullo's shoe and whether there was water where I thought there was water, at a seep I'd drunk from maybe 6 years back and wasn't certain was still good. And I was watching the country, the way you do when you've been alone in the desert for enough days that your eyes go automatic and wide. That's how I saw it. A big saguaro, old as anything, standing maybe 30 feet at the top arm, the kind of cactus that's been there since before anyone currently alive was born and will be there after everyone currently alive is gone. And there was color at the base of it that wasn't the color of the desert. Red and white and dark brown. It took me a moment to make sense of the shapes. I'd been walking for 3 hours and the heat had started to do things to the edges of what I was seeing, so at first I thought it was cloth. A bundle of cloth someone had thrown from a wagon. This happens. People throw things they decide they don't need when the weight of things gets to them on a long passage. Then the bundle moved. Not much, the kind of movement that costs everything you have left. I stopped Grullo and stood there for about 1 second. I've been in situations where standing still for a second is the thing that saves you and situations where it's the thing that kills you. I've learned over time to know which kind I'm in. This was the first kind. Then I went. She was tied at the wrists and at the ankles. The rope looped behind the cactus and was knotted somewhere at her back, so she couldn't bend or sit. She was held partly upright against the trunk, the spines of which had already found her back and arms through the fabric of her dress. The dress was dark blue once, I think. Hard to say. The sun had been on her for hours, probably since early morning, and it had done what the sun does. She had her chin down and her eyes were closed, and the skin of her face was a color I don't want to describe in detail because it is not a color you want in your head. Her lips were cracked through in 2 places. She was breathing, but the breathing was not good, short and shallow with a catch in it. It was the kind of breathing that is counting down. I said, "I'm going to cut you loose. Don't fight me." I don't know if she heard that. It didn't matter. I got my knife out. I keep it at the left hip, not the right, which surprises people and has served me well more than once, and went to work on the rope. As I said, good rope. It didn't give easily. While I worked, I could see her hands, which were tied in front of her and had swelled up dark and purple at the knuckles. There was dried blood along the inside of both wrists from the binding. Whoever had tied her had done it tight, and had done it knowing what tight does over time. Tight on a living wrist is a particular cruelty, because the wrist swells against it, and the rope does more damage the longer it stays. The last strand gave, and she came forward, and I caught her. She didn't weigh much. I don't know if she'd ever weighed much, but she weighed very little then. I got her down to the ground, into what shade the saguaro threw, which wasn't enough. The spines had gone into her back through the cloth, and I had to be careful lowering her. I moved slowly and kept a hand behind her back to hold off the pressure. I had water, not enough water. I had a canteen that was about half full, and I'd been rationing it because of the uncertainty about the next source. I tipped it to her lips and she drank. Not fast, she couldn't drink fast, her throat had been dry for too long, but steadily with her eyes still closed, like she was doing it by instinct before she was even fully conscious of what was happening. I gave her about a third of what I had. Then I stopped and made myself stop, which cost something. I wet the bandana I'd been wearing around my neck and put it on her forehead. I went to Grullo and got the second bedroll. I kept one rigged under the bags for the horse to lie on in the cold, which some horses won't use and Grullo always does, and draped it between the saguaro and his back to make shade. Not much, but angled toward her, and something rather than nothing. Then I sat down in the dirt beside her and looked at her. Mexican woman. Maybe 35, maybe 40. It's hard to say when someone's been in the sun that long, because the sun shows you a version of a person that isn't their usual version, and you have to look past it to see the structure underneath. She had good bones in her face, the kind of bones that hold shape, and I thought she'd been beautiful before this and would be again. Her hair was black and had come out of what it had been pinned into, loose around her face and across one shoulder, and the dust had settled in it the way dust settles on everything in that country, a fine pale film. Her hands, even swelled up as they were, showed work. Calloused in the right places, the heel of the palm, the outer fingers. There was an old burn scar along the outer edge of the right hand, something that had healed a long time ago and had healed flat and even, which means it had been tended right. I sat and watched her breathe and thought about the rope and thought about the water situation and did not think about anything else. I'm a man who thinks best when he narrows down to what's in front of him, and this is what was in front of me. A woman who needed water and shade and a stretch of desert between us and the next certain source of water, and the heat increasing steadily toward noon. The nearest water I was confident about was a stock tank at the Ruiz crossing, about 7 miles south-southwest. I could make it probably in the morning. That meant one more night in the desert. That meant the water I had needed to last between two people. I was thinking about all this in the purely practical way, I think. Go through the problem in order, don't get ahead of yourself, deal with what's in front of you first. What was in front of me was a woman who'd been left to die and had not quite died yet. And that was my problem now because I'd found it, and that was the end of that argument. I've had this argument with myself before, not about this exact situation, but about the general question of stopping when you don't have to stop. When stopping is your choice and not stopping is also your choice, and the cost of stopping is yours to pay. I've been the kind of man who stopped. It had cost me things, a position I needed. Once before that, something I won't describe here except to say it hurt in a way that took years to get mostly quiet. You'd think that would teach a man to ride past. I guess it hadn't. Or maybe what those 6 weeks of riding were, the aimless northwest drift, the unstructured days, the deliberate not arriving, maybe that was me deciding. Testing whether I still had the reflexes of the man I used to be, whether he'd survived what had happened to him. And here was the answer, tied to a cactus in the Chihuahuan desert, still breathing. About an hour into the shade, she opened her eyes. I said, "Water." She looked at me for a long time. The eyes were dark and very clear. People who are frightened have a particular look, and people who are in pain have a particular look, and they are not the same look, and you can read them if you've been around enough people in enough bad situations. She was in pain. She was not, at that moment, frightened. Which told me something about the quality of her. Not absence of fear, but management of it. She was assessing me the same way I'd been assessing everything, methodically, with the immediate practical question in the foreground. She said in Spanish, "Who are you?" It wasn't a question the way she said it. It was more like she was taking inventory. I told her my name in Spanish, which is not a language I speak well but well enough for the necessities. My name is Harlan Cole. I've had this name 61 years. It doesn't open doors in most places. It doesn't mean anything to anyone outside a narrow corridor of ranches between Sonora and Del Rio. She considered it the way you consider something that might be useful later and might not be. She said her name was Paloma Vasquez. Then she said the names of the men who had done this, and I listened. There were 4 names. She said them flat and careful, the way you say the names of things you need to remember and are afraid you might lose. Not with hate. hate comes later, after you've healed enough to afford it. After the immediate danger has passed and the body has stopped spending everything it has on the basics of staying alive. This was just accounting. I asked her if she could drink more. She said yes. I gave her a small amount. She held it in her mouth for a moment before swallowing. There's a thing some people know that most people don't. When you're very dehydrated, you let water sit on the soft tissue before you send it down, because your body takes it from the inside of your mouth before it even hits your stomach. She knew this. It told me she'd been in rough country before, or had been taught by someone who had. I asked her what the men had wanted from her. She told me it took a while, not because she was confused about it, but because there was a lot of it. Her father had owned land near a town called Palo Verde, on the Mexican side. Her father had died the previous winter in February of a thing in his chest that had been building for years. The men, 2 Americans and 2 Mexicans, working together under what she said was the direction of a land company in El Paso, had wanted a deed. Her father's land sat above a good spring, and good springs in that country are worth more than cattle, more than gold in some seasons, because without water you have nothing and nothing else can change that. Her father had hidden the deed before he died, which told me he'd known this was coming. She'd been pressured for 3 months to produce it. When she couldn't or wouldn't, they'd brought her out here. She said all of this without drama. She was telling me the facts of the situation the way a competent person tells facts to someone who needs them, to equip me, not to move me. The distinction matters, and most people can't make it in that condition. I asked if she knew where the deed was. She said yes. I asked if she was going to be able to ride. She considered this seriously, the way you consider a question that deserves a real answer rather than the answer you'd prefer to give. She looked at her hands. She tested her wrists gently. She said that with water and shade she would be ready to ride in the morning. I nodded. I believed her. I don't know exactly why I believed her so completely right then. Maybe it was the absence of hope in how she said it, not hoping it would be true, not asking me to believe it, just reporting the result of the assessment. Like a person who has taken accurate stock of herself for a long time and knows what she can and can't deliver, and never confuses the two. I got to work making camp. I had hardtack and dried meat in the bags and a small camp stove I only used when the conditions were right, and the wind was nothing that afternoon and I wanted to boil water. I had a small tin of carbolic that was mostly still in it, and a piece of clean cloth I kept in the inner pocket of the saddlebag. The wounds on her wrists and back needed tending. I told her about the spines first. There were 7 or 8 that had broken off under the skin of her upper back and shoulders, shallow, but they'd go septic if they stayed. I told her I was going to take them out, and that I'd be as clean and quick about it as I could. She turned and presented her back to me without comment. I worked through it with the tip of the knife, cleaned each site with carbolic, and then moved to the wrist abrasions, which were raw but not deep. The carbolic burned, I know. I've had it used on me in similar situations, and I know what it does to fresh stripped skin. She didn't make a sound through any of it. Once I thought I heard her exhale through her nose in a controlled, deliberate way, like a horse steadying itself. That was all. When I finished, I re-wetted the bandana in the remaining boiled water and handed it to her, and she held it to the worst of the right wrist without being told. The swelling in her hands was going down slowly. The color was coming back to her face, not fast, but coming. The sun dropped behind the ridge around 5 o'clock, and the temperature fell the way it falls in desert country in summer, fast, almost startling after what the day had been, like a held breath finally let out. The smell of the desert changes when the heat breaks. It goes from something burnt and mineral to something almost green, something that remembers what rain was. I got the bedroll out for her, and she started to refuse, and I said it was too hot for a bedroll anyway, which wasn't entirely accurate at that point in the evening. But I had the duster, and I've slept in worse. She accepted this without argument, which told me she'd decided to be practical about things she could be practical about and save her energy for the things she couldn't. We ate without much talking. She was conserving herself, and I understood it and didn't push. After dark, though, she talked. Not about the men, not about the cactus or the rope or the hours she'd spent there. She talked about the land near Palo Verde. She talked about her father and what he'd built, the 30-some years he'd spent on that piece of ground, the spring, the pasture on the east side of the property, the way he'd managed the grazing so the grass came back every year instead of stripping down to rock the way bad management will do. She had a technical and specific way of talking about cattle and land, weights and grasses and fencing and water management. That told me she knew what she was talking about and had grown up knowing it. She wasn't dreaming. She was planning. I listened. I asked a few questions when I had them. She answered them straight, no embroidery. There's a kind of intelligence that shows itself in how specifically a person can answer a direct question, and hers was that kind. At some point she asked me where I was going. I said northwest, New Mexico probably. She asked why. I said no particular reason, just going. She was quiet for a moment. The desert at night in late June has a particular fullness to it, the things that only come out after dark, the wind that comes in small gusts and then stops, the sky crowded with stars in a way that you don't see in country where there are lights. I've spent a lot of nights in open country, and I never get entirely used to that sky. There's something in it that makes your ordinary troubles feel slightly more correctly sized. She said in English, which she had not used before that moment, and which she evidently spoke perfectly well, clearly a choice she'd been making, "That sounds like a man running." I looked at her in the dark. I could see the shape of her face against the stars, the straightness of her back even sitting even after that day. I said maybe. Or a man who got tired of standing still. She said, "Is there a difference?" Not a question, the same inventory voice. I didn't answer. She didn't press. We sat in that for a while, which was comfortable in a way I hadn't felt sitting with another person in longer than I was inclined to count. She slept before I did. I sat up watching the desert and listening to the particular silence of that country, not a quiet silence, but a full one, with small things moving and the wind, and once, far off to the south, something that might have been a coyote or might have been a man. I thought about the 4 names she'd given me. I thought about what 7 miles meant in the morning heat with a horse that was still tender. I thought about what came after the 7 miles. I did not think about what any of it meant in terms of the direction I'd been traveling. Not yet. We left before first light. I put her on Grullo. He was still a little tender on the left front, but the shoe held and 7 miles was manageable if we took our time. I walked alongside. In that country in summer, walking before sunrise is not a hardship. The air has that quality you don't get any other time, almost cool, very still, carrying the smell of things that only open at night. I don't know what all those plants are called, the ones that do their flowering in the dark. I just know their smell, and it is one of the better smells I've come across in 61 years of being in various places. She rode quietly, back straight, reins held easy, not gripping. She rode like someone who had ridden a great deal and had nothing to prove about it. We reached the stock tank at the Ruiz crossing around 8 in the morning. There was a family there, a father and 2 boys, maybe 10 and 12, with a small herd of goats coming in for the morning water. The father looked at me and looked at Paloma and made an assessment without making it visible, the way people in that country learn to do. He brought water without being asked, and a cloth soaked in something that smelled of dried herbs and which he handed to Paloma for her wrists. She thanked him. They talked for a few minutes in Spanish too fast for my ear to follow, something about her father and a name I didn't recognize, and the man's expression shifted into something more settled, like he understood now what he was looking at. When we rode out, she said, "He knew my father." I said I'd figured something like that. She said, "My father was known in this part of the country. He helped people when he could. The family of Ruiz, he gave them a note once when the season was bad. He never called it in." She paused. "He was that kind of man." I said, "That's a good thing to have said about a man." She looked at me sideways from the saddle. "You don't have family here, you don't have that." It wasn't an accusation, just noting what was and wasn't there. "I don't have family anywhere I know of anymore," I said. "Parents gone. I had a brother, Emmett, but we lost track of each other after the war, went separate directions out of it, and I never managed to find which direction he went. No wife, no children." I said this without particular feeling, the way you account for things that are just true. "I've ridden alone for a long time." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "That is a long time to ride alone." "It is," I said. We kept going. Palo Verde was 2 days south and slightly east, back across the border. I had no particular reason to go south and east. I had no particular reason to go anywhere. But I wasn't going to put a woman with broken rope burns on her wrists on a horse and point her toward the border and wish her luck. Not with 4 men somewhere behind us who had used good rope on her and who were going to figure out eventually, maybe soon, that she wasn't dead. I didn't make a speech about this. I didn't announce a decision or ask if it was welcome. I just kept walking south and east, and she kept writing, and somewhere around midday on the first day she looked over at me and said, "You are not going to New Mexico." I said, "Not today." She looked at the horizon ahead of us for a while. "I did not ask you to come." "I know that." She turned to look at me then. The full-on look, both eyes, the one she'd used that first morning from the ground. The one that was taking stock. She said, "Why?" I thought about this the way it deserved to be thought about, not the quick answer, but the real one. I said, "Because they'll come back for you, and you shouldn't have to handle 4 men alone." "I have handled men alone before." "I know you have." I looked at her up on the horse. "I'm not saying you can't, I'm saying you shouldn't have to. There's a difference." She held the look for another moment. Then she turned back to the trail and said nothing, but something in how she carried herself on the horse shifted in the set of her shoulders, and I saw it. I didn't say anything about it. Some things you just let be. We made camp that night on a limestone bench above a dry wash, with a clear line of sight in 3 directions. I picked the spot for that reason, and she noted it without comment, just swung down and went to work unsaddling Grullo while I went looking for wood. We'd settled into a camp routine without any discussion of it. She tended the horse. I built the fire. She cooked. I cleaned up. It organized itself the way things organize themselves between people who are paying attention to the same thing. After dinner, she sat on the far side of the small fire and took stock of her hands by the light of it. The swelling was almost gone. She flexed each finger slowly, testing the range. "Do you have a gun?" I said. "I had one, they took it." I had the rifle and a Colt on my hip. In the bottom of the right saddlebag, I kept an old single-action Derringer that I'd been carrying for about 15 years more out of habit than necessity. I got it out and checked it in the firelight, clean, loaded, the mechanism sound, and handed it across to her. She took it without making it a moment, opened it, checked the loads, closed it, set it beside her in the fold of her skirt. This is the correct thing to do when someone hands you a firearm, and most people don't do it. And the ones who do are the ones who have been trained right or have learned the expensive way. "You know how to use it," I said. "Yes." We were quiet for a while. The fire was small and very steady, no wind to speak of. She said, "The men who did this, I want you to know what they are. Not bandits. Not desperate men. The Americans work for a company based in El Paso. They have been acquiring land along the Rio Grande for 2 years. Your land, my land, other people's land. Always the same method, pressure first, then worse. Other families, other ways of worse. My father knew it was coming and prepared for it. He just ran out of time to prepare for all of it." She looked at the fire. "Even if I get the deed and register it, they won't stop. They'll send others." "You're telling me it's not finished," I said. "I'm telling you it's a longer thing than this." She looked up at me. "I don't want you to think you came south and the thing is resolved. It isn't." I understood what she was doing. The same thing she'd done the first morning. Giving me an accurate accounting of the situation so I could make an honest decision. Not trapping me into something, not softening it so I'd stay. I said, "One thing at a time." She said, "Yes." The deed was in a church. The church of the family of Vasquez, on the east side of the plaza in Palo Verde. The priest there was a man her father had trusted. The deed was sewn into the back of a kneeling cushion in the second pew from the left, the one with the darker wood on the end from a repair made 20 years before. She told me this on the afternoon of the second day, as we crossed the border through a dry cut that she knew and I didn't, a shallow break in the rock that wasn't on any map I'd seen. I said, "Sewn into a kneeling cushion." "My father had a sense of humor," she said. "It's a good place. Nobody kneels on things and wonders what's inside them." "Except the priest," she said. "The priest knew. He is a man who keeps what he's told to keep." "What kind of man is he otherwise?" She thought about it. "He has seen a great deal and is still capable of being surprised by goodness. My father said that was the hardest kind of faith to maintain and the most honest kind when you find it." I thought about that the rest of the afternoon. We reached Palo Verde in the late afternoon, coming in from the north side of the plaza. It was small, 25 buildings, a well in the center, the church, a cantina, a dry goods store with a faded sign, a farrier's, a few houses of various ages. The kind of town that has been there long enough to stop trying to look like anything other than what it is. Several people came out when they saw her. An older woman who wept and held her. Two men who shook hands carefully, looking at her wrists. A young boy of about 8 who ran immediately toward the church without being asked, as if he already knew what needed to happen. I stayed back with Grullo. I am not good in clusters of people who know each other when I am not one of the people they know. I have no gift for the social navigation of other people's intimacy. I watered the horse at the trough by the dry goods and watched from a distance. She was a different person in that small circle. Not softer exactly, it wasn't that. But the particular tension she carried when there was danger and uncertainty had let go, replaced by something that looked like its absence, like a man whose hand has been clenched for so long he's forgotten what open felt like. She was among her own, and she knew it, and it showed. After a while, she came over to where I was standing. "Father Salinas wants to see you," she said. I said I didn't need to see the priest. She said, "He wants to see you, come." I went. Father Salinas was old and small, with the hands I mentioned earlier, the particular combination of roughened and precise that comes from physical work and years of reading. He looked at me for a moment and then smiled, the kind of smile that changes a person's whole face and is hard to distrust, and offered me water from a clay pot in the corner of the room behind the sacristy. The room was cool in the way thick-walled old buildings are cool, a different temperature than outside, almost a different time of day. It smelled of candle wax and old paper and stone. I could hear the sounds of the plaza coming through the small high window, but muffled, like sounds from another room. He said in English, "She told me what you did." I said I hadn't done much. He said, "A man who says he has not done much after doing something either does not understand the value of what he did, or he does understand it and is being modest. In your case, I think it is the first." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. He said, "She is not a woman who accepts help easily. She is not a woman who trusts easily. She is practical about almost everything, and being practical, she knows the cost of trusting the wrong person. That she allowed you here says more about you than you may realize." "She didn't exactly allow it," I said. "She stated her objection. I came anyway." He laughed, genuine from the chest. "Yes," he said, "that sounds exactly right." We sat in the cool room for a few more minutes. He asked me how long I'd been in that country. I told him. He asked what I planned to do after. I said I supposed I'd ride north. He looked at me the way she had looked at me, that quiet inventory, and then he gave me a blessing with his hand briefly on the top of my head in Spanish, which I hadn't asked for and which I found I didn't mind. Then he told me about his sister's house, where there was a clean room and a yard for the horse, and which I was welcome to use. I thanked him and went. I stayed 4 days before the confrontation, and then 3 more after it. The first day I slept, which surprised me. I don't sleep easily or long as a rule. But the sister's room was dark and had thick walls and smelled of whitewash and something like lavender. And I slept 10 hours the first night and 8 the second, and woke up both times feeling like a man who had been holding his breath for a long time and hadn't known it. The second day, I helped a man named Esperanza fix a fence line on the south side of his property. He'd come to the sister's house early in the morning, hat in hand, and said he'd heard there was a good man in town who might be willing. I said yes, because it gave me something to do with my hands, which I always need when I'm thinking through a situation. We pulled old posts and set new ones and ran new wire and talked about cattle and ground water and the Mexican side of the Rio Grande. And he fed me a good lunch without asking me about myself or my business, which I appreciated. On the third day, I saw the 4 men. I was in the dry goods buying coffee and oil for the rifle when they rode in. They came up the road from the south, which told me they'd made a circle rather than following us directly. They were being careful, or they'd gone back first to report and had been sent back. 2 Americans and 2 Mexicans, as she described. The Americans wore town clothes that were too clean for the road they'd been on, which told me they thought of themselves as businessmen even when they were doing things that businessmen shouldn't do. They went to the cantina. I paid for my things and went to the church. Paloma was there with Father Salinas. She read my face before I said anything. She said, "The 4. At the cantina, I said. Father Salinas said, "The alcalde." Paloma said, "The alcalde is afraid of them." "I know," the priest said. He said it without judgment, just as a fact about the situation. I asked about rifles, It turned out that Esperanza and his older brother Tio had been waiting for something like this since the spring. Not because they were looking for a fight, because they were the kind of men who had decided that if the fight came to their street, they would meet it standing up. Esperanza told me this directly when I went to him, and he heard who I was talking about. He said, "We know these men. We have been expecting them to come back. We are ready." We were brief about it. 3 positions, clear sight lines, the important thing being numbers and certainty. The men in the cantina were not going to start a war on a street where they couldn't count what they were facing. Men like that only proceed when the calculus is in their favor. They came out late in the afternoon. They'd been drinking, which is what happens when men feel secure in a place where they have no reason to feel secure. They celebrate their own anticipated victory before they've won it. The tallest of the 2 Americans, a broad man in the dark wool coat, saw me standing in front of the church and stopped. He was doing the same calculation I'd expected. I told him about the deed. Registered witnessed on its way to Presidio. Told him the story was wider now. The priest knew, the family knew, the Ruiz family at the crossing knew. Told him every time they came back the story got wider. He stood there for a long moment in the late light, then said something low to the other 3, and they turned and went back to their horses. I watched until they were gone from sight. Then I stood in the street while the dust they'd made settled, and felt the afternoon's tension go out of my body, joint by joint. Paloma was in the doorway of the church. She'd watched from there. She had the derringer in the waist of her skirt, which I knew because I'd seen her put it there that morning. She hadn't needed it. She knew that, and that wasn't the look she had when I walked across the plaza to where she stood. She put her hand on my arm, just for a moment, the sleeve of my duster where the canvas had gone soft from years. She didn't squeeze or say anything. She just put it there and looked at me, and I looked back at her, and for a moment neither of us did anything more than that. I have been thanked, I've been paid. I've been given a meal or a drink in exchange for work done or help given. I've had people clap me on the shoulder or shake my hand or nod in a way that communicates what words don't. All of those are fine. None of them are what that was. What that was, and I have thought about how to say this many times, and I still don't have a word that fits exactly, was being seen. Not the action, but the person behind it. The specific man who'd been riding nowhere for 6 weeks before that Cactus, who'd made a particular set of choices over 61 years that had brought him to that piece of desert at that exact hour. She was not thanking me for what I'd done. She was acknowledging who I was, which is not something that happens often, and which I had not been prepared for. She said quietly, "You could have been in New Mexico by now." I said I wasn't in a hurry. She almost smiled. Paloma Vasquez's almost smile is the kind of thing most people might not notice, and I noticed it, and I won't forget it. After the confrontation, I stayed 3 more days. I helped Tio and Esperanza run a new post line on the east boundary of Paloma's property, which she had made clear she intended to work. I know land and I know cattle and I have opinions about fencing, and she had opinions too, and they were not always the same opinions, and the disagreements were good ones. The kind where both people are trying to get a thing right rather than win an argument. The evenings were the time I remember most clearly. She cooked at the small house on the property, a 2-room adobe her father had built that needed work on the north wall and the door but had sound bones, and I ate at the outside table in the cooling air. We talked about the land, about cattle, about the summer rains that were coming and what they would mean for the grass. Sometimes about other things. She told me about her husband. He'd left 8 years before, not badly, just gone. A man who couldn't stay in one place. I know that kind of man because I'm partly that kind of man, or was. She said it without bitterness, just as information about the shape of her life. I told her about the ranch in West Texas. 11 years. And then the thing with the owner's son, not something I need to describe in detail, but a situation with a simple moral and a complicated practical. I'd stood on the right side of it, and it had cost me 11 years of work, and the closest thing I'd had to a home in a long time. I'd ridden out of there with nothing except the knowledge that I'd done what I should have done, which is real but which is also cold comfort on a long road. She listened the way she listened to everything, completely, without hurrying it, without filling the silences before they were ready. When I finished, she said, "You did the right thing." I said, "Didn't feel like it at the time." She said, "That's how you know it was the right thing. If it felt easy and obvious, it wasn't a choice." There's a version of that kind of statement that is just words, reassurance with no weight behind it. Hers had weight. I don't know how to explain the difference except that you feel it in your chest when it lands. On the morning of the fourth day after the confrontation, a morning I'd been thinking about, one I kept almost making a departure and then not making, I was saddling Grullo before sunrise. The habit of early starts is deep in me, and I'd given into it before I'd committed to anything. I was working the cinch when I heard the door of the house. She brought coffee in the clay cup. She handed it to me without ceremony. We stood together and watched the light come up on the country east of us. In that country at that hour in summer, the sky goes through a color before full sunrise that you don't see elsewhere, a very specific pale gold, almost the color of old paper, that lasts only a few minutes before the full day arrives. You have to be up and watching for it. I've seen it maybe 50 times, and it still does something to me. After a while she said, "The east pasture will take 2 seasons to come back fully. The fence on the south side needs to be replaced entirely, not just repaired." She paused, looking at the pasture. "I need a man who knows cattle and knows how to handle trouble when it comes." I said, "You're offering me work." She said, "I'm telling you what the situation is." I looked at her in the early light, the straightness of her, standing with the cup in both hands and her eyes on the country. She was doing exactly what she'd done from the beginning, giving me an accurate accounting, leaving the decision clean on both sides. No performance of need, no softening of the offer to make it easier to accept, just the facts of the matter. And yet, there was something in how she'd said it. A man who knows cattle and knows how to handle trouble. That was not just a job description. She'd been watching me for a week. She'd watched me in the desert and watched me on the road and watched me in the street in front of the church. She'd formed a view, and the view was specific, and she was telling me what the view was by what she was asking for. A man who knows cattle, a man who knows how to handle trouble. This man, not anyone, this one. I've been many things in 61 years. I've been capable when capable was needed and steady when steady was needed and useful in the ways that I'm useful. I've done work without needing anyone to know my name or notice the shape of what I'd given. But I can tell you that there is a difference between being useful and being chosen, and the second thing is rarer, and it matters more than you might expect to a man who has been riding alone for a very long time. I finished the coffee, turned the cup over in my hands. The clay was still warm. I said, 2 seasons is a long time. She said, yes. I said, the south fence alone will take most of July. I know that. I set the cup down on the top rail of the fence. I looked at the country east of us. Full light now, the pale gold gone and the day coming on hard and clear. The land going out toward the horizon flat and enormous, the kind of country that requires the whole sky to cover it. In that early light, the east pasture had a quality it would lose in an hour, something soft and possible, the way places look before the work of the day gets to them. I said, the cattle you want, you thinking longhorns or something crossbred? She turned to look at me, the full look, both eyes. She said, longhorns to start. The land's not ready for anything that wants more from it. I said, that's right. I tightened the cinch the last notch and then didn't get on the horse. She didn't say anything, just waited. The way a person waits when they understand the person they're waiting for, when they know that pressing doesn't help and patience does. I turned and leaned against Grullo's shoulder, a habit of mine. The horse is warm and solid and doesn't need anything from me, and looked at the house. The 2 rooms, the wall on the north side that needed replastering, the door that hung a little off true. The fire she'd started before coming out, the thin white line of smoke from it going straight up in the still morning air. The east pasture going out toward the ridge. The kneeling cushion in the second pew of the church that had held a dead man's deed for 6 months. I thought about all the places I'd ridden out of and ridden into. All the mornings on the road. The particular loneliness of being a reliable man in a world of people who use reliable men and move on, and the particular freedom that same loneliness sometimes feels like. I thought about what she'd said the first night. Is there a difference? I thought about the answer I hadn't given then. I went back to the house and rinsed the cup in the basin and set it on the shelf where it lived. Then I went back outside. I'll need to get the fencing material from Presidio, I said. We should make a list of everything at once so I'm not making 2 trips. She looked at me for one more moment. Not surprise, not exactly. More like the confirmation of something she'd decided to believe might be possible, watching it become real. The quiet of a woman who has been right about something important. She said, I have paper. We went inside. The south fence took all of July and the first 2 weeks of August. The posts in the middle section had rotted through at the base worse than either of us had thought, and we had to bring in gravel from the wash to bed the new ones solid. Tio helped the first week. After that, it was the two of us, and then after the first month, it was just the two of us in the way it was just the two of us. I don't know what to call what we were to each other that summer. I'm not sure it requires a name. She ran the place and I worked it, and we ate together at the end of every day and talked about the work and sometimes about other things. And there were evenings when the light came off the east pasture in a way that was worth sitting with, and we sat with it. And that was enough. Some things are complete without needing to be categorized. The trouble came back in September, as she'd said it would, with different men, 3 this time, harder looking than the first 4. We were ready. The alcalde, who had become less afraid of things after the first confrontation had gone the way it had, was there. The 3 men looked at what they were facing and made the same arithmetic that the 4 before them had made and left. I don't think they came back while I was there. The deed was registered by then. The spring was hers in the records of 2 counties in 2 countries. The cattle came in October. 12 longhorns, which is where you start and you build from there. I drove them down from a man I knew near Marfa. 3 days' ride with them, arriving on an afternoon in the second week of October when the air had finally broken, and the first real cool of fall had come through, and the light on the pasture was that particular low gold that fall has, different from every other light. And she came out of the house when she heard them coming and stood in the yard with her arms crossed, watching them come through the gate. Then she looked at me. I have been looked at in a lot of ways over 61 years and from a lot of faces. I've been looked at with relief and with need and with gratitude and with assessment and with the particular blankness of someone who has decided I'm useful for a specific purpose and no other. I know what those look like. I know the difference. What she had in that look was simple and was enormous, and I'm not going to diminish it by trying to put it in complicated language. It was a woman watching a man be exactly what he'd said he was, deliver exactly what he'd said he'd deliver, and understanding what that meant. After everything, after the cactus and the desert and the 4 men and the September trouble and the 2 months of fence work and the long evenings on the outside table, watching this one man come through the gate with 12 longhorns in the October light. What he was, what he'd chosen to be. She walked out to the gate. She put her hand on Grullo's neck and looked up at me against the low sun. She said 12. I said, it's a start. She said, yes. And then come inside. I made something. I unsaddled the horse and turned him out into the pasture with the cattle, and he went without argument, and I watched him go for a minute before I went in. She'd made a soup from dried corn and peppers, and something I couldn't name but which smelled the way the cool room in the church had smelled, layered and old and exactly right, the way something smells that has been made many times in the same place over many years. We ate at the table by the window while the last of the light went out of the sky, and the cattle moved on the east pasture, and the stars came up cold and clear, and the house held the warmth of the cooking long after the air outside had gone cold. I have been a lot of places. I have done work I'm proud of and work I'm not, in country from the Picos to the Sierra Matter, for outfits that valued a good man and outfits that valued a body to do a thing and nothing more. I have ridden past things I should have stopped for, and I have stopped for things that cost me something, and I've lived with both kinds of decisions. I thought for a long time that the writing was what I was, that the particular loneliness of a man who's good at his work and doesn't need much and doesn't expect much was just my nature and not a circumstance. You tell yourself that long enough and it stops feeling like a loss and starts feeling like a preference. I was wrong about that, as it turned out. I just hadn't been shown otherwise. She showed me otherwise, sitting in the dirt at the base of a cactus in late June, weighing my name carefully and telling me her own, and giving me the 4 names of the men who'd done it in the same flat voice, and then the next morning telling me she needed until morning. All that accountability, all that precision, the way she never asked for anything she could manage without, and didn't pretend the situation was simpler than it was, and didn't pretend I was anything other than what I was. There is a particular gift in being seen straight. Most people don't have the eyes for it or won't use them. She had the eyes and she used them, and what she saw was enough. I sat at that table in the lamplight with the soup and the cold coming under the door and the cattle out there somewhere in the dark, and Grullo in the pasture, and the smoke from the fire, and Paloma at the other side of the table telling me something about the east pasture and what she thought the spring rains would do. I sat there, and I was exactly where I was. I'd found that somewhere between Pedernal and Palo Verde. Somewhere between a length of good rope and an October evening with the sky going dark and the cattle in the pasture, and a woman who had looked at me from the ground after a day in the desert, and decided, before I'd earned a single part of it, that I was a man worth trusting. It's enough, it's more than enough. It's the thing a man builds the rest of what he's got on, if he's lucky enough to find it. Outside, the cattle moved in the dark pasture. The stars were fully out. The country south of us was quiet and very large, and the house was warm and lit, and I was in it. That's the whole of it,